This is the Lockpicking Lawyer, and what I have for you today is a really interesting Soviet automobile gas tank lock. What makes this lock so interesting is not the mechanism, which is really simple and relatively easy to open, but it's this lock's place in history. And I'll get back to that in just a moment. But first, let's take a look at the paperwork that came with this lock. These large letters tell us that it is a lock made for an automobile gas tank. And if we flip it over, you can see there are a number of pieces of information that can be filled in by hand at the factory, including the price, the assembler, but the only two that are actually filled in are the serial number and the date of manufacture. And the date is the really key piece of information here, September 25th, 1991. If you know your history, you know that was in the closing days of the Soviet Union, and it was also during one of the worst fuel shortages in the country's history. A fuel shortage so bad that by this time about half of all Soviet airports were closed because there wasn't fuel available for the flights. So what we have right here is a fuel tank lock made for people to use to secure their fuel supply during one of the worst fuel shortages in the country's history. And that's why I find this lock so interesting. If we look a little further over on the paperwork, we can see the model number, the word Kharkov, which is a city in the Ukraine, and I believe where this lock was made, and then the word Blesk, which means luster or shine, and I think that's the name of the company that made this. We see this symbol right here, which is, or could be, a stylized Cyrillic B. That's also right in the center of the lock, and I think that goes along with the word Blesk. If we flip the paperwork over, we can see that this was made for Zhiguli cars. Zhiguli was the name of a car company in the Soviet Union, except for models BA3, 2108, etc. So apparently this would fit all Zhiguli cars except for these four models. Then we have the instructions, which tell us to rotate the rings until the two numbers of the combination are lined up with a mark here, and then the two halves of the lock will come apart. So let's take a look at the lock now. We can see the clamshell design. It has two halves that are designed to fit around the fuel tank filler cap, and because we have these two shelves here, it can't be taken off that cap until the two halves are taken apart. Then if we look on the front, we can see two rotating rings. If you line up the two digits of the combination with this little mark right here, the two clamshell halves will come apart. And then we have on the side the price of the lock, 3 rubles 40 kopeck. And that's something that you find pretty often in Soviet-made locks. Let's open this guy up now. We have a combination F1, which I had to decode. And if we look at the back of these rings, we can see that it has a bunch of false gates cast in place, and then 2 true gates, which line up with these 2 little, I guess, fences you'd call them, when the correct combination's dialed in. And it actually looks like someone manually went in and ground those 2 true gates into place after the rings were cast. So a really interesting construction, one where someone had to manually set the combination permanently. I suppose you could set an additional combination if you had a file, but that's how this is made. So let's see what it would take to decode one of these locks. We'll put it back together. And I found that the easiest way was to pull the two halves apart and just find any gate for the outer ring. And then the inner ring, you can find a little bit of movement. And what I would do is just move it along. Same little bit of movement, little bit of movement. And then we get to the correct one. There is a lot of movement. It moves a lot more. And that means we're in the right spot. And then at that point, we essentially just go around and we brute force it. And there's only, 20 some combinations. It doesn't take long to figure this out. see. I happen to know the combination, so that makes it, I guess, a little bit easier. But there you can see it comes apart pretty easily. It shouldn't have taken someone very long to decode this, just because you can feel pretty easily the difference between the false gate and the true gate. In any case, that's all I have for you on this Soviet automobile gas cap lock made for Zhiguli cars. A really interesting lock that was made during one of the worst fuel shortages in Soviet history, and a fuel shortage that contributed to the fall of the Soviet Union. So certainly a sign of the times and a sign of things to come in what I think was a really interesting time period. So that's it for now. If you do have any questions or comments, please put them below. If you like this video and would like to see more like it, please subscribe. And as always, have a nice day. Thank you.